On the motion that we should require AI companies to pay licensing fees to the owners of the data they use to train their models, I'd like to welcome the first affirmative speaker to open the debate. Here.
Am I good to go? Two things in the speech, but before that, a couple of points of setup. First thing to note here is the kind of data we're talking about. We think this is mainly private data that are oftentimes locked behind things such as paywalls and intellectual property protections. Why do we think this is true? This is purely because oftentimes data that's in the public is oftentimes in the reasoning is because authors want that to be publicly disseminated. So the main types of data we're talking about here is private data that individuals do not want to be recreated. The second thing to note here is as to how our policy is going to work, and that is, it is when data models or large language models are doing data sweeping, we're trying to collect data, we think you can use things as specific markers on specific things that you do not want to be used. We think those markers are able to indicate to individuals and to large language models that this data is protected and you cannot use this for your own protection. The third thing to note here is what happens in status quo, and that is oftentimes large language models are able to bypass things such as IP protections and paywalls and access things such as New York Times and Economist articles in their data sweeping. The last thing to note in setup is how does licensing work, and that is oftentimes we see small data sets being grouped with larger data sets. For example, you're able to get what exactly the Guardian published regarding Donald Trump ever since he's been in the public space. So therefore, panel, we think given the volume of articles regarding a specific topic from a specific institution, you're likely to get a large sum of money for this. And the institutions that produce these things can use it in multiple ways, not just for individuals themselves, not just for authors themselves, but for the institutional benefit of reproducing other good data, like good information as well. With that being said, first argument then on why this is moral. The key context that I want to note here is that what AI is currently doing, panel, is breaking intellectual protections when they bypass these kinds of things and they get this information. Crucially, we think on our side of the house, why individuals want things to be protected under IP protection is because they do not want this to be just disseminated freely and they want to be credited or paid for their work. Why is then IP important? The first thing to note here is that oftentimes this is a label of your work. It is the secret sauce that allows you to really earn money and earn a livelihood. Comparatively on their side house, when you're able to get it, they're able to reproduce the secret sauce that you use for the benefits that you're likely to get. So we think, panel, in order for you to actually live a good life and for you to actually get credit on the livelihood benefits that you like, it's very important for these IP protections to exist. Two things that are likely to be impacted. Firstly, I think it infringes upon individuals' ability to consent to how exactly their data or exactly how their work is produced. Because you should have control over how exactly you want your data or the benefits of your work to go. The second thing to note here is about jobs as well. Because if someone is likely to just reproduce exactly what you're producing, the probability of you being able to constantly reproduce or put out good data rapidly reduces. And it takes away individuals' onus over themselves. The third thing to note here is that oftentimes, panel, AI is very good at reverse engineering exactly how you came to that conclusion. So that means, panel, that it's directly able to mimic how you do your output from the final output that you get. This means that you're likely to just take away individuals' ability to actually do good things because of the fact that it's just reproducing things on a vast scale. The fourth thing to note here is that oftentimes AI doesn't actually credit the information where it's getting from. This is because, or rather, if you just Google, if you put something in ChatGPT, it just doesn't show you where the specific information is coming from. This is crucial because this allows individuals to not get credit for their work, because we think it's important, because you put a lot of time and effort into developing these things, and therefore we think it's important for you to be able to consent and get recognition for these things. Considering how we do things such as how we do research papers and things like that, we oftentimes have to give exactly where we got this information from because we want to credit the individuals who do this. The last thing to note here is that oftentimes, considering how data models are used right now, they oftentimes can be a little bit wishy-washy. That means if you do not allow individuals to give individuals preference as to how exactly their data is being used, it's very easy for large language models to misquote you and rather give you very bad things or paint your opinion in a very negative way. Because of these reasons, panel, we think it is largely immoral because we think we should give onus on individuals' creations, and we think that is the ability for them to earn a living. Two impacts of this. The first thing to note here is that even if they're able to claim some amount of benefits, we think that we outweigh that. Because think about it. We currently say that, for example, we think that banks should do certain things because it may be good for the economy, but it fucks over their workers and fucks over specific groups in society. So we think we're able to get that benefit on our side house. But the second thing to note here is that this is oftentimes immoral. Think about it. Individuals spend a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort in developing their AI. They should get credit. They should have onus over their lives. The second thing to note here is that on why we're actually better for the overall basis. First thing to note here is that we think these payouts are especially good. That is to say, insofar you're forced to buy data sets from The Guardian or forced to buy data sets from The Economist, this is relatively good because one, you're able to benefit the authors of these articles, but crucially, we think that this money can go to the institutions like The Economist and the New York Times, and this is crucial because this allows them to get a substantial amount of money that they can use to reproduce or put more information out there. So this means more exposés on the dirty work of corporations and governments, more good analysis as to how the world works and informing the public. We think we're able to cop that benefit substantially on our side of the house. The second thing to note here is that we think we give onus to the authors themselves to price their work. Because on their side of the house, they are not likely to get exactly how they're going to price it. Because on our side, we're able to give the onus to the individual and allow them to price it and able to value their work far better on our side of the house. The third thing to note here is that how we're likely to get support for better work, and that is, insofar you are paid and recognized, panel, you have an incentive to constantly produce good material and put out good data. This is important because we think the way AI currently works is it's very good at taking data and mimicking it and reproducing it. It's unfortunately not good in terms of producing its own good data sets and producing new material. We think on our side of the house, we give individuals, if they know that they like to get paid or like to get recognition for their work, we think there's an incentive that they have to constantly be able to reproduce or produce good things and produce good data, which we think that we're able to do this. We think that we're able to produce the disillusionment that individuals have when they think that my work is just going to be stolen by a large language model and I'm unable to really produce good data, so there's no point in me actually doing this. We think we give individuals an incentive to constantly produce new good things and produce that to the public. The last thing to note here is that even if this licensing, even if this doesn't work, why is it particularly good? Because we think this is particularly important because it may slow down AI, and we think this is a number of effects. One, we think that in terms of jobs, we're able to protect the individuals who might be replaced or the ones who are producing this material. But second thing to note here is that it protects other jobs as well. Think about all the impacts in terms of the middle level and lower level jobs that AI is threatening to wipe out currently. So the factory managers, the low-level McKinsey analysts who can be just fucked over. We think on our side of the house, we protect them because we're able to slow down AI. The second thing to note here is that we're able to actually, when to slow it down, panel, it's easier to then regulate because you allow regulators time to catch up. Given how fast AI is evolving currently, it's very hard for the evolution and for these individuals to catch up. So therefore, on their side of the house, it keeps reproducing racist shit and really bad things. On our side, we're able to allow for regulators catch up and kneecap these things. The last thing to note here is that oftentimes AI is very disruptive as well because it produces things such as misinformation and propagates that throughout society. I think on our side of the house, we're able to regulate far better and account for these if it's slowed down. For all of these reasons, affirm.
Thanks so much for that speech. I'd like to welcome the first negative speaker to open the negative case. Here.
So before my speech, again, I'd like to use this opportunity to make an appreciation note. First, thank you so much, Izzy, Josh, my dear and respected teammates. You have patiently mentored and supported me in the past few weeks and during the tournament. Without them, I cannot stand here. I will also say a big thank you to all the MUDS members who have support and celebrate for each other during this whole journey. We're a big family. And as a conclusion, I would like to acknowledge my debate homeland, China, where I still start to debate and grow. Without all the support and inspiration I get from my Chinese friend and from China circuit, I could not go this far. And I deeply wish more Chinese debaters can be heard in larger platforms like this. My speech will start 3, 2, 1. First, an affirmative speaker focus on very narrow scope. Just tell us, right, ChatGPT should pay guardian authors money. First, I want to remind you, if they have a totally new model talking about different things, it's a big case shift. It's not consistent with that. They have to defend their model from the very beginning of the speech. And we'll expand and flip this clash at all in the beginning as my rebuttal, right? First, they're talking about we do not give those authors credit, right? I think we can co-opt that. We have the counterfeit to require companies to give correct recognition about what kind of data they're using, right? We require less local capital. We require much less admin and negotiation costs. We can co-opt that in the model. Second part, why this payment method are counterproductive and not really helpful, right? Secondly, they try to talk about, okay, the authors have incentive to produce good things, right? They already have very pretty strong incentive to produce good article, photographs. They want to be seen, they want to be accepted by these good journals to get money, right? Thirdly, the most counterproductive part, right? They said that, right, we want to get good training. The actual shift is that when OpenAI or those companies realize they have to pay the author, to get these good articles, in their world, they probably do not buy these articles anymore, right? They go to public spaces to looking for cheaper projects, also free and low quality data. That's what they claim, right? Public data is not within our discussion, right? So which actually in our side, right? This expenses deter the big AI companies using good data to train their AI models, which actually lead a better low quality AI, right? Or if in this case, tell you why it's not effective and why it's actually counterproductive, right? And then move to our constructive, right? We believe that this debate should not be this narrow. We believe that when we talk about the data collection, things, we're talking about so many other things that AI companies want to know right now, right? Looks like your shopping habit, your searching history, all those pictures on online, or your comments, answers you made under questions, right? Several things here. We think this data already be stripped. And this policy just further strengthens the data ecosystem, right? We think the first biggest question we need to answer is who owns this data. Yeah, it's we feel that individual owners actually not, right? It's like big tech companies like Google or Apple, right? We just unconsciously take up I consent to give you data. It also looks like those big flight or hotel companies collect all your personal information or travel preferences, all the things, right? So to point out this like big data already collected and they're actually stored and owned by those big companies, right? Now what they can do is they can further monetize it, right, or sell it, right? For example, it looks like it's only the Google or like this big tech companies, they can sell fake data, right? They probably just like this branch of Google paid another branch of Google who store the data, right? It also looks like, for example, in many cases, even in the cases the affirmative try to argue, right, the authors of a picture or those articles do not really own their data or like their authorship. They already developed like to the journal or the press, etc., right? We do think this just further entrench oligopoly and the big data market, right? Secondly, it also looks like we actually introduce more and more malignant actors into this place, right? Because it looks like in their side house, now if you collect and process a large amount of data, you're able to earn quite a lot of money by selling those, for example, to the AI companies, right? It looks like, for example, we actually incentivize more cyber attack and collection and illegal processing of data. I want to point out several things. First, all those things happening, these things happening everywhere. It's impossible to government have very systematic legislation, even if it's just so hard to catch because all those sneaky things they do in the dark corner, right? Secondly, this legislation cannot override all the previous legislation, which means big companies already own the data. They already know that people consent to them, still own them. They still make quite big of money from those things, right? Thirdly, we believe that just like people, it's very hard for people to out. They already gave up all the things, right? Or let's talk about this. Even if let's take the best case scenario that they claim, okay, we're able to pay the individuals. It's still very worst case, right? First, the payment that the individual gets can be very, very low because just one line of your information doesn't really matter and doesn't matter much, and it's very hard to get a big payment, right? And secondly, only aggregation of large big data that big companies can have and can collect can really worth a lot, right? Secondly, individuals also do not have bargaining power against these AI companies. They probably cannot set market price, right? Thirdly, we'll further explain later, right? If the company really need to pay individual a relatively good amount, let's say $1 per your information, just further increase the the price of those AI models and why it's really bad for access of AI, which my second point, right? We already intuitively explained to you that why those AI companies they need to spend more money, right, to purchase this as an expense, right? This automatically become more expensive. They probably have to turn the free model and into a charge one or a subscription one. They require everyone to pay much more, like $10 a month, right? We think this is very bad from the very beginning because we want to people from developing countries, those students are able to get free access to AI to learn the things from them. We think it's good, right? This also looks like, for example, we already explained to you, only those big companies are able to sell free or to purchase data, and those small companies are unable to do so. Several important things here. First, small company needs similar amounts of data to get their model trained well, right? Secondly, we think these small companies are really important, right? They try to develop new models who have good market competition. Thirdly, many of them specialize in many areas like language processing, medical imaging interpretation, very important for things like cancer treatment or how to help vulnerable people, people have listening or learning disability, right? It's in their side, you shut down these small companies, right? So it looks like just we have a much worse oligopoly, right? That only big companies are able to develop. There's several very bad impacts. First, it makes them just more complacent, right? It's if I can just earn money easily by charging people, and it's a good use to charging you because I already pay you money to get data, right? It's just on the air. You can see a good example is ChatGPT only release new models after DeepSeek, right? We release new things. That's why we want small startup companies to join this competition and also push everyone to do harder work, right? Secondly, we think this also they have far more lobbying power, for example, to repeal this policy or to reduce the market bargaining power that every individual has, which will further mitigate your long-term impact, even if you're able to get some short-term benefits, right? Thirdly, we believe that you further entrench the biases, right? It looks like now the companies, especially for a small one, even if they're able to survive, they have to pick the most valuable data they think lucrative one. It's like for example, in medical imaging area, they probably prioritize picking white privileged people because they're able to earn most like treatment new money from them, right? Probably discard those underprivileged, underrepresented minority because even if we have a new good treatment or like recognition for them, they are not able to earn money from them. And also this bias further entrenched when you already use a biased AI to generate a code and incorporate a code or plan and you further development, all the things becomes much worse. Very honor opposed.
Thanks so much for that speech. I'd like to welcome the second affirmative speaker to continue the affirmative case. Here.
One, on regulation and requirement. Second of all, on AI development. Third of all, on reparation. One, straightforwardly, the first analysis on like, basically you're going to be violating some data collection or whatsoever. Data collection is going to be happening on both sides of the house, as in you're going to be signing a treaty, a legal requirement when you're opting into Facebook because of how they, even though it's the case of like you don't read all of them, these kind of predatory companies are still having incentive to data collect you anyway. One, because of how the incentive of advertisements to exist. Two, because of how all the companies are still in business information system. Business analysts, data analysts right now is on the rise. They know they need data to also develop their business as well. So this happens symmetrically most of the house. Second of all, on regulation. One, notice how the narrative right now on their side of the house is simply we're just going to be pushing out some requirement. They never explain to us this way, why are they doing this greatly or they are doing this efficiently. I want to respond why this is going to be doing badly on their side of the house, why better on our side of the house. One, why boards on their side of the house. On smaller business in general, this is a simple analysis. There's power asymmetry on their side of the house because of how it's just a requirement. There's no actual legal procedure to actually happen afterward. There's no like legal fine, or there's basically no like lucrative enough incentive for people to push through these kind of cases. This is how they're scared of these kind of incentive of like long length in like court and whatsoever. Two, this is how these big companies have political backup. So therefore, on their side of the house, if you only have to only attack like small companies, you're not gonna be able to do anything. Second of all, why big corporations don't want to risk don't help you on their side of the house. One, they don't want to be exposed to these kind of stuff because of how these kind of big companies are already sensitive with their data collection. They don't want to go to court on any legal procedure because of their data collection if there's nothing in the return for themselves. I.e., their Facebook don't see any money returned back to them. Why would they go to sue OpenAI or about the use of Meta, right? So comparatively on outside the house, because of how notice how our model is not just a small chunk of money, because of how that's going to be a really small debate, and I don't want that to happen. I don't think anyone wants that to happen. It's going to be a really big chunk of money to the extent that you're going to be like the bigger the business you are, the more reward you're going to get, the more data proportionately to the data that you're being collected from. Therefore, big corporations on the outside of the house therefore have an actual incentive to go out and follow the legal procedure comparatively if there's any illegal bypass, which the other side also never explained why they're going to be able to solve this kind of problem. So therefore, that's actually solved the problem of one, money, and second of all, political asymmetry of power, capital as well. So how therefore those kind of bigger companies right now is going to actually join the fight against illegal collection of data on their side of the house. Third of all, there's nobody of legislation right now capable to do it, keep up with this like inherently. So if we manage to prove our second argument on like we are going to be slowing down the AI development to a really big extent, we are getting better regulation because of how that's going to be able to adapt throughout the way. Notice how this is not only about the professionalism of people who are regulating this is also on the legal procedure of it, as in you have to advocate for your campaign, advocate for your legal procedures, advocate for the way that you're going to be regulating this. This has to be adaptive to the time and adaptive to the term of AI right now. I.e., if just some weird like small AI, obviously it's going to have different regulation, like a really big AI and how fast it's gonna be. And also notice how also a lot of legal procedures and laws are really hard to be enforced and changed in a short amount of time. You need time to actually get it in place. Then so the faster AI develop, the worse your regulation is on their side of the house. So this is gonna be contingent on my second argument. Second argument, this is going to be bad for AI development. I want to first of all wash out the argumentation on competition first. One, there's going to be a convergence of development. Why is this the case? This is how our model is like saying the bigger the data, the bigger amount of money you have to pay. This also means that the bigger the companies, the bigger the data that you have, the bigger money you have to pay as well. This means that this is proportionately to the size of these kind of companies. Therefore, this means that a lot of companies going to be slowing down, i.e. OpenAI and DeepSeek is going to be slowing down and wait for Meta to catch up. This is how Meta is paying less money than OpenAI and DeepSeek and whatsoever. So therefore, this competition doesn't happen on that side, outside the house, and therefore that's just not the case. And also, second of all, negative can just claim that competition push is just for that's not stuff. That's already enough to wipe out the competition stuff on their side of the house. They never explain to us why this would be able to crack down regulation, crack down this kind of stuff. Notice how this is a flip. The other side of the house, because of how the mechanism right now is just a requirement and just like a regulation. Like I said before, the bigger the AI companies is, the bigger power they have on controlling this narrative, and the less people actually go out and sue them. So therefore, they actually have more power on this kind of regulation as well. So therefore, smaller AI companies are being regulated harder on this side of the house. So how this is a low-hanging fruit. Notice how a lot of politicians and lawyers want to push for these kind of cases because of how they want to have some achievement under the belt, or just something to brag for the next elections to be more likely to be elected. So therefore, on their side of the house, all these smaller competition, these smaller companies is going to be regulated harder. Therefore, competition actually worse on their side of the house, better on our side of the house. Second of all, why is this bad for AI development is good? Notice how they never explain why this is a bad thing. The only mechanism they gave here is just some people in the developing countries will not be able to access this. I would say this is a good thing because of how if the people in developing countries is where that you don't have any regulation at all. So there's the place that you're the most vulnerable, as in you are in really bad economic position right now, but you are also really easily replaceable by this kind of AI, which is being called by this side of the house economically efficient and really efficient in the jobs. So therefore, this kind of stack of people is actually really vulnerable right now, and the easier they're getting replaced, is the worse the outcome happen to. Second of all, this is how developing countries also where production happen the most, as in manual labors or just some normal stuff is happening more. And developed countries have more brain thinking and artwork and whatever, which is harder to be replaced. So therefore, developing countries being more harm in this class as well. So why this is good? One, it's not Nevan to give you a host of reasons which no one respond about why it's going to be harming both the jobs of these authors and everyone else, because of how this is easily replaceable and how developed AI is. Basically, we stop them from developing, we're stopping them from getting through. But second of all, the nuance here is adaptability. This also happens to normal general people. If the second and third speaker just come in and say, change your job, you cannot do it in the short span of time. So how basically you are not prepared for this yet, your system is not prepared for this yet, your family is not prepared for this yet, your educational system is not even diverse enough for you to prepare for this yet. So therefore, the nuance of yourself, the society, the regulation, whatever, are not prepared for you to change. So therefore, you cannot actually change, and you are just stuck there, unemployed. So second of all, basically, this also means development of regulation. I already explained it to a really big extent. So therefore, this is a contingent on the first argument as well. Worse regulation, worse AI, and therefore worse life of people already push a lot of burden on their side of the house. Lastly, on reparation, slightly on the principle first. Notice how their side of the house only have just a requirement on money. Notice how this also not only about philosophical reason. It's just basically if you're taking someone else's job, you should pay for them. This is a normal intuition and principle, never explained on their side of the house. But second of all, the monetary way of justifying this is when you're getting some intermediary products for your end production, you should pay for that intermediary product as well. I.e., if I'm using say an iPad for debating and to generate more money, I should pay Apple for my iPad, because how basically I'm still getting more money out of it. And that's not how they're valuing this. Also, second of all, on practical impact, notice how authors are ridiculously important in this debate on both big scale authors and small scale authors as well. No matter how big they are, they deserve to get money back. This money is going to be funneling to a vast majority of stuff. One, One, this means better services in general. I.e., if you're like paying back to Meta, they might have better system of like protecting people against scam or whatsoever. If you're paying back for like say some healthcare system, this is how you're getting medical history out of them. They might be able to like better off the medical system as well. So therefore, more money to trickle down to actual things that people actually use outside of their life. So therefore, this is good for not only the companies themselves, also the people that are using these kind of services, which is a really big impact. This is how right now they're not being replaced by their jobs. They have better quality of life, and lastly, their life is regulated. This kind of company is regulated. I rest my case.
Thanks so much for that speech. I'd like to welcome the second negative speaker to continue the negative case. Here, here.
Sorry, I had so much paper.
That's all good.
Yes, correct.
I think the problem with this affirmative case is they're clickbaited by the type of AI that people tell you exists. They're clickbaited by Meta AI, by the Snapchat AI chatbot that is just an enhanced search tool, and maybe in that world they can unlock some of their benefits. But what we actually explain is the way that AI is developing and the way that AI is dangerous and profitable is in the macro data. It's in its ability to think like a human. It's in its ability to do all of the things that it's like kind of getting crazy and really analytically good at doing. And what that means in this debate is we are talking about a different type of data. We're not talking about the individual book that you put on the internet, that like you put into the Meta AI and tell me about this book and it tells you. We're talking about the types of AI that corporates use, that companies use, that they do big predictions and big data types of collections through. And those are the types of data that are like far more pervasive, that you ought to be far more protective with your data on. What am I going to do in this speech? First, I'm going to explain what type of data we're talking about. Then I'm going to talk about how these companies get it under us and under them, explaining why we win on each. Then I'm going to explain how we get better regulations. Let's talk about what type of data this is. This team tells you that it's things like books. We explain at Aaron that this is untrue because a lot of this is already out there. Things like the Guardian articles, the marginal utility that they add to an AI chatbot's ability to predict market patterns are so small. I think a lot of this data already exists. A lot of the historic textbooks and shit already exist. I don't think there's a huge amount of benefit that companies get from this data. We tell you that the types of the way that the companies are developing AI is they want to be able to predict your behavior. They want to be able to predict where you're going to shop and where you're going to buy and what kinds of market trends are occurring, how the market's changing, what stocks go up, what stocks go down. And those are things that need the type of big macro data that we explain to you at Aaron, because we explain that it's like that this debate is about macro data because this is the way that AI is working. It wants to be analytical, it wants to think, it wants to model, it wants to problem solve. And macro data means things like big aggregated pieces of data, which unlocks all of our benefit because this team tells you that maybe this is about books. And like what I would tell you is that even if it is, they have to prove that people own those books and the people who write the books own their data, which we explain is unlikely at the point where you sell it to a publishing house. So I don't think they get that benefit. But the reason why it is likely to just be macro data is because these are big companies. These are like, maybe you've heard Cambridge Analytica, but I don't think you've heard of a single other data aggregation company because they're scary and they linger in the back rooms and they take your data and they use it and they sell it because huge chunks of aggregated databases are useful. Macro data is useful because you can use it to predict behavior. What one person writes, like you can literally get ChatGPT to write you an article and then feed that back into ChatGPT. The useful benefit is this big scale macro data that only happens on our side. And this just looks like things things that are incredibly expensive. They look like big, scary companies who own them. They look like whoever bought everyone's DNA that was loaded into 23andMe because someone bought that data. Like, it's really, really scary. And this type of macro data is just the one that is profitable, that allows AI companies to unlock the next generation of innovation that they are seeking. What this means in this debate is that if you want to talk about individual books, that's fine. This team had to prove that those benefits trickle down to individual authors, which they don't. I'll explain that in a second. But it does just mean that we unlock all of our harms on how this allows, on how this creates more perverse incentives to collect data, on how this incentivizes cyber attacks, on how this incentivizes crazy uses of data that you do not consent to, that you do not opt into, and we improve that on our side. So what this means is this debate is primarily about macro data, but I'm going to be incredibly charitable for the next section of my speech and explain, given this is the data we're looking for, how do people get it? Because they tell you, and their claim here on how we actually interact with this data landscape is to be incredibly charitable and use their characterization here, that you pay vulnerable authors for their content that they create. But we explain to you that authors just don't own this data. They sold the rights to their book at the point where they ticked the box that said, I'm going to work with this publishing house, because obviously there is a huge power disparity between an author and the publishing house. And when the publishing house knows it can sell its data now that it collects from this author, obviously it has an incentive to collect that data in a more perverse way that puts up the price of that data, so the publishing house can then sell it in the future. So what this means is that they don't get the individual benefit because people aren't data savvy enough. How many times have you clicked a survey that said, yes, you can collect my information, and not actually knowing what that meant? I think most people are pretty lazy and willing to sell their data quite quickly, which means they are unlikely to own it in the first place, and that benefit does not go to them. But secondly, I would explain that the line items of an individual piece of data probably gave you 2 cents in this debate, because the types of data that we're talking about are the ones where you have to be where you have to have big amounts of predictive power, and that needs a lot of data. So even if they do get this money back to the authors, it's 2 cents. It's unclear why that's more important than being able to get royalties from your book in the first instance. I don't think this is a benefit that they can claim in this debate. What does that mean then? What does that mean then? It means that if we're talking about their characterization, they lose this debate. Let's talk about ours more. What we explain is that they tell us a couple of things in response to our material about how theirs is bad, essentially, because this is still living in their world. What happens? They tell you a couple of things here. The first is that big companies don't do perverse things on their side because there are incentives to not be because you're going to get caught and it's going to be really transparent and bad. But we say, they say that all of this data stuff is bad and happens already. But there just has to be a change in this debate, and the change is that there is a huge increase in prices because you know now you know that you can sell this money. You now know that you can sell this data. So there's just an incentive to get more data. And notice how that unlocks all of our benefits, because on their side, when you can sell this data, there are obviously perverse incentives to collect this data in really sneaky and dangerous and scary ways. There are incentives to dupe people into giving you their confidential information or their literal DNA. There are increased incentives to do cyber attacks, to hack emails, to do data password stealing, and to give passwords to terrorists and that kind of thing there. Obviously, all of that increases, and maybe we get it, but obviously terrorists are going to go for your data more when they can make money off of it than when they could not on our side, because we run a hard line that explains that you cannot monetize things on our side. They have to back monetizing, which is obviously an incentive for evil actors to do evil things. Under their side then, they're unable to unlock their benefit to authors. But notably also, they just invite so much harm to everyone else who now is at risk because all their life's work is being monetized and toyed above them in a way that they cannot control. And that is really, really, really bad. Let's talk about what this looks like on our world, because I know this is a little bit messy. What we stand for on our side is that OpenAI puts, what we stand for is that, essentially, we're just going to, we back the hard line at Aaron that explains to you that if you don't give your data to these companies, if this data is not publicly available, they cannot access it, right? That's how this debate functions, because either you have a license and you pay money and you get the money, or you don't. And what that means in this debate is that we're still likely to get the good things of AI, things like medical benefits, because if you're a medical company, you can give medical data to people on the basis that they're going to create you an imaging technique that allows you to diagnose breast cancer. So that's an obvious benefit and an incentive for you to give that data when it serves a social good and social utility. We all get that type of AI. The type of AI that we don't get on our side, though, is the crazy evil monitoring companies, the monetizing companies that just want to get richer off of your data, that want to profit off of your spending behaviors and your habits and the way you conceptualize spending your money. And all of those people are really, really terrible. This team tells you that under our side, OpenAI just puts pressure on you to get more data. But I think we can just flip this. I think at the point where OpenAI is putting crazy pressure on individual companies, probably that is the point where someone's holy shit, we need to regulate these guys. They're trying to force me to sell them my DNA, or to give them my DNA paying for free, probably that is the point where we get more regulation on our side. But I just think people continue to give AI to these companies when they do good things. That means on our side, there is a pathway for AI to continue to develop in ways that are important, in ways that are socially utile, but we don't get the evil profit-seeking stuff that motivates cyber attacks, that takes your data and steals it and like uses it in really perverse ways. That's particularly bad there. Finally, I'm going to talk super quickly about regulations. I think a lot of this is already in the debate because what we expect, this team tells you they slow the development of AI, but I contest, I just don't think that occurs. I know that for a fact that ChatGPT received $13 billion of investment from Microsoft and $400 million just the other month. I think ChatGPT and the big companies just pop this fee and they just pay it, which means that all of the material about monopolies is unlocked on our side. This data is incredibly expensive. If you can't afford it, your model is worse, you can get priced out of the market, which means that all of the monopoly stuff that we talk about still exists for this team under their side. But on our side, we unlock the benefits of having more regulated AI because companies that are unable to get this data because they can't pay for it anymore no longer have evil incentives. They can no longer use it in evil ways. That means that we slow the development of AI, not this team. At the end of this debate, if you care about your data, if you don't want some random creepy background person to have your DNA, you should vote neg.
The Dhruv is a Dhruv.
Thanks so much for that speech. I'd like to welcome the third affirmative speaker to conclude the affirmative case. Hear, hear.
The first question I'm going to ask is on IP. The second question I'm going to ask is on who actually, what this data actually is. Thirdly, on authors. Fourthly, on AI. Firstly, on IP. I want to emphasize this is completely independent of what you believe this data is. Because even if you believe it is the metadata, those big companies own that metadata, yeah? You sign it over when you click that tick on Facebook or you click that thing on Google, which means all the mechanisms that we explain, that is literally the own private property of these companies. And they all have the ability, at the very least, to choose whether or not the data is given or still applies on our side. But secondly, I would point out that in an instance where it's very large companies, those companies obviously have the ability to sell that data by their own thing, right? The way this works is whether or not this data is publicly available and easy to access. Metadata is kept behind a paywall, which is Google is the one that collects that metadata, where your cursor goes and things like that, which suggests actually it is not the type of public data that they can access and therefore not encompassing. But even if you do not believe that, it is still the ownership of those companies, and those companies ought not be able to remove. They do not respond to this claim, and I want to emphasize this is the first thing Nevan says, and there's not a single response to it. I don't know how much clearer you want us to be. Why is this debate winning? Firstly, because it is just illegal. You are taking things that is owned by somebody else, even if it is not a small author, it is a big company, and that company has the right to do whatever the hell they want with it. Maybe they give it free to OpenAI, or maybe they choose to instead sell it in individual packets. It doesn't matter. It is their property. It is their and also they do whatever they want to that data, like any processing or stuff, which means it is their right to do whatever they want. In the same way, it won't be legal for me to say kill somebody else just because it might be beneficial for the economy or good for AI on net. It doesn't mean that this I can say that just we get better alternatives otherwise. But secondly, it is important for general obviously obviously if you assume that the companies that are most able to protect this data and prevent companies from taking it are the larger institutions, obviously the moral harm then is like much greater and accrues far more when is the instances that we suggest, for example, smaller authors who do, for example, have individual works robbed from them, right? So it is actually a very high impact argument. Even if the site says like, oh, boo-hoo, big companies, we don't care, it doesn't matter because these companies function, and the way our economy functions is one in which people have the right to own the property that they have, and this team cannot just ignore it by maybe a third saying, boo-hoo, big companies. This material was given at first incredibly clear. I don't know how else to weigh it other than maybe they should have responded to it. Second 10, what sort of data are we actually talking about? And we explained that specifically it is the data like, for example, individual. Why? Firstly, intuition. The companies they suggest are not AI companies. They're companies that use AI to, for example, make predictions like Cambridge Analytica. The debate talks about AI companies. These companies that produce AI for the users themselves to use, which is things like, for example, ChatGPT. So maybe they can be used for the predictions on, like we discussed, but their primary use is training the AI data sets themselves. So it's unlikely to be metadata and more specifically instances. Because secondly, AI is useless unless you give it like something useful to do. Like yeah, sure, now GPT is at the point where it can emulate human speech, but you can't get any more human. The point is whether or not you can do more skilled tasks, like writing stories, like writing articles, like doing research. Those are the sorts of things that you're specifically taking data from. That's far more important and it's far more likely to instead like introduce onto their side. Sorry, what's my response? Yes. Firstly, the thing I want to say though, individual response of hidden aggregated model criteria. One, why is this unique to AI? Clearly these models were established based on like not AI. Their side would like obviously be like obviously the incentive to take that data for non-AI companies like Cambridge Analytica that just build models is the same on either side. Secondly, I just don't think our case actually really changes even if you believe that. Thirdly, surely on our side then you would actually more rate that data. Because the thing is, if somebody is actually required to sell you that data on our side, which we explain these big companies anyway required to like OpenAI, then presumably that data is seen as more valuable under society. So people are far more likely to be able to do things or more willing to do things like, hey, my data is being sold because of these licensing agreements. Maybe I should protest or say that I ought to be have that. Or maybe they don't instantly click that checkbox onto their side and give up their data without thinking about it. It means on our side you're far more likely to get those data protections. But fourthly, even if it is that, again, these people just consented for that action to happen in the first place. And they suggest that, well, maybe publishing houses or stuff are the ones that allow you to put that data. One, obviously in that instance, the point is that you are taking the data from the publishing house, right? So you would be required to pay the license fee there. No skin off our backs. But the second thing is that even if you, like, obviously authors themselves in the way that we explain, have a right to choose how their work is used, especially when that work can be, like, back, like, you know, what's it called? Like, reverse engineered in order to replicate their own work. So even if that author initially sold it to the publishing house under the condition that maybe they might get cited, maybe for, like, you know, somebody might read that and then get inspired later on, they did not consent initially that that work would then be used to replicate their work in entirety. Obviously, then that means that those authors ought to have a right to protection and ought to have a right to control themselves. Even if it's not perfect, it's probably better on our side. But the last thing I would suggest is that metadata is just useless because you cannot make specialization, because maybe it helps you understand how to structure a response, but it doesn't give you the high matter and complex things that we suggest. So, first path to victory, like two paths to victory here. One, their metadata claim is entirely symmetric because obviously you can access that data from metadata from many other sources. But secondly, obviously these big companies still have the incentive to sell it, right? Because they could enter into negotiations with these big AI companies. Like Google obviously has the ability to choose whether they give OpenAI more of their metadata than under the status quo, which suggests that it is relatively symmetrical on their side, the incentive to seek out this metadata. But secondly, advertisers obviously use this metadata. Like there are a range of ways in which data is used in society, not unique to AI companies. And I wouldn't even explain why AI companies is such the additional proof that, like, you know, terrorists are going to start stealing your data inherently. But even if you believe all that, the first part to victory on it is just immoral and they do not have a single response or outweigh that. Let's ask the second question in this debate. Why this is far better for authors? The first thing they suggest is that we would give authors credit on their side and that is better. Firstly, that is irrelevant because even if you give an individual author credit, that is lost in a sea of authors that are amalgamated into that specific AI response. It's very easy for you to remove the accountability from the specific author that was responsible or more. But secondly, you're still stealing the goddamn data. Just because you give credit doesn't mean you give credit to the way in which that data is used or replicated or instead reverse engineered. It doesn't matter if you give credit, you still in fact need to give, like, you know, have their right to take it back. The second thing they say is that authors don't own this data. I've already responded to in those instances that it just would not actually happen. The third thing they say is that authors will write equally on either side and therefore there's no incentive. This does not respond to the material given to you at Nevan. Firstly, you would never choose to write in the first place because you lose, like, faith in that system. Why would you be willing to enter into or start writing if you know an AI will take your job in the future, or you know that, for example, you never have space to a job because everyone is using AI? Secondly, your job on their side gets shanked by AI, so current authors instead are getting taken over by AI. But lastly, authors must exist for AIs to exist, and this is the key information we give you at Nevan, yeah? That is the reason that AI steals articles from The Guardian is because it cannot write themselves. themselves because it is very bad at replicating or creating sentences or doing research itself. Therefore, in order for AIs to function and do the things that they say are so good, you require authors to provide that information towards them. On our side, those authors who provide the good information get paid and keep doing that good information. On their side, they die and AI development stagnates. So if they want to say that AI is so good, it's on our side that you support the people that actually make their AI fly better and far more important. Why would you weigh this incredibly highly? And that is, these are the people who just directly have the largest harm in this debate. It's not just authors, it's everyone who loses their jobs because an AI might eventually take it. These people lose their livelihoods, the way that they earn money, and they have to give up on their fundamental dream. Like, think about how many art students or English students are in this room now who have to give that up because of the fact that an AI just makes their job irrelevant. Finally, the question on is AI good? Because I want to emphasize this, their biggest push in this debate is just unproven as to why AI is good. Because we explained, slowing down the development of AI by taxing them really big means that, for example, they cannot skirt regulation. It means that you're able to prevent the worst instances of AI, like spreading misinformation, because these companies are large. Their responses are, one, big AI companies can get around. Sure, we'll make the licensing even more. We'll stop the development in its tracks. They secondly say that specialization is important. One, that is obviously in tension with a metadata claim, because specialization is stuff that we claim on our side. But secondly, if it was so good and you have the consent of authors and stuff, then surely the licensing fee on our side would be zero for their medical AI, and the medical AI would still be able to develop pretty easily on their side. It's not clear why you need alternatively. The last one to say is that, well, you're going to monetize this, like small actors are better and competition is the better mechanism. But we would explain competition is not the better mechanism because it doesn't stop the worst instances of AI. It just makes AI better and more available. It doesn't mean AI doesn't take the jobs of people. It doesn't mean AI has the worst harms of spreading misinformation. So deciding what prioritizes the one who gets regulation, which decides that net reduces AI. Even if it's a couple of big actors, those actors cannot lobby the government, those actors cannot do anything, which means the worst instances are prevented. They do not prove that IP should be ignored. They do not prove that it is metadata. They do not prove that AI is good, and they do not prove authors are unimportant for proposition.